Buenos días a todos y a todas. Les pido por favor que sintonicen en su pantalla el canal de interpretación que quisieran seguir. Tenemos interpretación en español, inglés, francés y portugués. Entonces, por favor, solamente hagan clic en el botón que está en la parte de abajo, en el globo. Si no les aparece un globo, simplemente van a los 3 puntos en la parte que dice More y allí pueden seleccionar la parte que dice Traducciones y pueden seleccionar el canal que quieren utilizar para escuchar en su idioma. Vamos a dar 2 minuticos y empezamos con el webinar. ¿Les parece bien? Simplemente una revisión rápida de personas que están en la sala y empezamos. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos y a todas quienes nos acompañan el día de hoy. Por favor, si alguien tiene problemas técnicos o si alguien tiene problemas con la traducción, simplemente puede enviarnos un mensaje en el chat. Una vez más, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Mi nombre es Milena Bernal. Soy coordinadora de la campaña contra la ganadería industrial en la Global Forest Coalition y me gustaría agradecer a ustedes por su tiempo y por la disposición para unirse
Merci.
a este workshop. Vamos a tener hoy una breve ronda de presentaciones. Van a ser unos tiempos muy cortos el día de hoy para cada presentación, pero simplemente queremos invitarlos e invitarlas a que por favor estén muy atentos de la información y si tienen preguntas en cualquier momento puedan presentarlas en nuestro chat o enviárnosla posteriormente al correo que les compartiremos en el chat también. Voy a hacer una breve presentación de el porqué de este workshop el día de hoy. No sé si ven mi pantalla, pero en general lo que quisiera simplemente es hacer una rápida introducción sobre quiénes estamos hoy, por qué nos reunimos y cuál es el fin y el objetivo pues, de este workshop. Esta presentación y este espacio se crea con la finalidad de primero dar a conocer el trabajo que estamos realizando desde la Global Forest Coalition y desde la campaña Stop Financing Factory Farming, una campaña que se crea en el 2021 con la ayuda y de manera coordinada entre varias organizaciones que se conforman como el Steering Committee de la campaña, con un fin específico. y es solicitar y requerir a los bancos públicos y a las instituciones financieras que detengan el financiamiento a la ganadería industrial. Nos unimos con el objetivo de también presentar propuestas, no simplemente de criticar los modelos de producción animal, sino también de presentar propuestas y de incluir las voces de muchas organizaciones que están preocupadas por este tipo de industria, pero que también quieren aportar en el desarrollo de acciones para asegurar la soberanía alimentaria y, por supuesto, para asegurar que todo tipo de visiones que tienen que ver con la producción de alimentos sean consideradas de manera equitativa. Es una campaña que cuenta con diferentes cuerpos, vamos a decirlo así, de participación, un steering committee donde nos encontramos 7 organizaciones, más un grupo de aliados, miembros que se unen con un objetivo de apoyar la campaña y algunos partners que tienen otro tipo de participación más específica, pero con un mismo objetivo, establecer una solicitud conjunta a los bancos públicos, los bancos de financiamiento que en este momento están apoyando el modelo de ganadería industrial. Con el fin de empezar de manera más coordinada y con el fin de entender cuáles son los impactos de este tipo de sistemas productivos y para entender también cómo podemos unirnos entre todos para detener o al menos para cambiar estos sistemas. Vamos a hacer una pequeña presentación inicial. Es la primera parte de esta agenda. Estará comprendida en el marco de la pregunta del por qué nos tiene que importar lo que está pasando con la ganadería industrial en el mundo. Para esto vamos a tener un espacio de 25 minutos. Voy a dar paso a nuestros presentadores. Voy a iniciar con la presentación de un video que nos envía nuestro compañero Wenbo, quien participó activamente en el desarrollo de nuestro último reporte sobre ganadería industrial y el rol de Asia en esta industria. Y posteriormente daré la presentación y la introducción de otros 2 de nuestros compañeros quienes nos acompañan desde el día de hoy, Patricio Elisegui desde México, y posteriormente daremos la introducción a la presentación de Karen Reyes desde Sinergia Animal. Entonces vamos a presentar el video que nos envía Wenbo. Por favor, ustedes si tienen problemas con el audio, simplemente háganoslo saber.
Hello, everyone.
Please let me know if you can see fine.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone.
Oh, just a second. I think I need to pause my just a second. I need to pause the translation.
Good morning. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wenbo. I'm from China and serve as a committee member for Global Forest Coalition ETI campaign. I'm going to present on the trend of animal agriculture, production and consumption in Asia, and also its impact in Latin America. So despite a global slowdown in deforestation rates, more forest area have been lost in Southeast Asia over the past 20 years than anywhere else in the world. The aquaculture, the fish and shrimp farming have been the primary driver of the mangrove deforestation in Southeast Asia over the past 3 decades. The once biodiversity-rich ecosystem of these coastlines, which includes seagrass, coral reef, and mangrove, are being replaced by expanding aquaculture farms, and often under the name of blue economy. So what has changed in the consumption pattern? Historically, meat consumption across Asia had been far lower than in Europe and other northern countries, because population in many of these countries in Asia rely on fish and plant-based protein. But increased urbanization and rising income have led to a shift in food consumption pattern. In countries like China, Vietnam, South Korea, pork consumption will be dominant and also be increasing. And the Philippines, Thailand, and Japan, chicken and pork increasingly occupy a central role in consumption pattern, where population of Indonesia and Malaysia consume mainly chicken meats and products based on their religious belief. Animal industry also been expanding in Asia. From the 1980s onwards, the transition toward intensive farming in countries like China have been stimulated by favorable government policy and limited environmental regulations. For example, in China, the number of dairy cattle increased from 120,000 in the year 1949, which is founding year of People's Republic of China, to 6 million in the year 2019, which is 3 years ago. As of the year 2020, the large-scale dairy farm account for over 70% of all dairy farms in China. So much of these developments trend similar in other Asia and Southeast Asia countries. For example, of all 10 Southeast Asian nations, Vietnam's pig and poultry production have been growing the fastest. And this growth in this region have been supported by government policies, which are in favor of industrial livestock farming. And also, they were supported by foreign investment from development banks. For example, the International Finance Corporation, which is a private sector arm of the World Bank. The top 5 development banks have poured around 4.5 billion into those big meat companies, countries like Vietnam, China, and Singapore, and so on, because they believe that it's both help to elevate people's living standard, but also probably making business. So in Vietnam, the livestock sector witnessed intense commercialization over the past 2 decades, leading to huge growth in animal numbers and increased demand for imported animal feed. The livestock sector in Cambodia also see a rapid boom, with poultry production increased by 54% between the 2007 and 2015. So what's the impact of all this trend on South America? So to fuel these rising demands of meat, many countries in Asia and Southeast Asia have seen increasing deforestation to clear the lands for agriculture-related practice. So they to expand the farm, they have to get space, and then they clear cut their own forest land. So their own forests have been impacted, but they also increase imports of animal feed and meat products, which also linked to deforestation in a country like it's million more animal being farmed across East and South Asia each year. There's a huge demand for feed. To meet demand, more and more soybean and other animal feed are being imported, and much of this is linked to deforestation in South America. So let's look at China, because China is a country that's a huge impact. China is second largest world economy, and its ecological footprint is huge. And that footprint not only confined with within China biosphere, but also cuts on global ecosystem. China's increasing demand for meat and dairy is having a huge impact on the forest in South America. So a report by Trace and CDP found that 43% of deforestation emission in 2017 due to soybean cultivation in Brazil can be attributed to China soybean import to meet demand for feed for China growing livestock farms. So other significant importer of soybean from South America, including Indonesia and Vietnam, which are have a booming economy. among all Asian countries. And according to a WWF report, China's import of agricultural commodities drive more deforestation globally than any other markets, including the United States and European Union combined. And China imported millions of tons of beef, soybean, and other agricultural commodities that are sources from legal and often illegal deforestation, and continuously fuel devastation of ecosystem vital to fight and mitigate climate change. So the scale of China's impact is very noticeable. It's very notable in Brazil. China's import had a major role leading in destruction of Amazon rainforest and the Cerrado savanna, where 2/3 of land cleared for vegetation and being converted to cattle pasture. China is the final destination of nearly 1/3 of Brazilian beef export. So what's the pathway to an intensive agriculture-free future? So Asia presents the global battle to mitigate climate change with a great threat, but also opportunities. So civil society and governments and private sector and consumer alike must quickly wake up to this threat and assign resources to find solutions capable to reversing the trend of industrialized livestock farming and the damage it's doing to the environment. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Daniela, por ayudarnos a compartir las experiencias y parte de la investigación que realiza Wenbo. La pueden encontrar también disponible en el informe que publicamos desde la Global Forest Coalition titulado El impacto de Asia en la industria, en la agricultura industrial. Ahora quiero dar la bienvenida a Patricio Eleisegui. Patricio es nuestro compañero argentino, quien actualmente se encuentra viviendo en México. Patricio trabaja en el campo de la comunicación y el periodismo profesional desde hace más de 2 décadas, con un enfoque en la exposición de los impactos socioambientales negativos generados por el modelo agroindustrial en Argentina y en toda Latinoamérica. Patricio nos va a acompañar hoy con una exposición sobre lo que ocurre en el momento en el estado de Yucatán, México, y también nos va a compartir otras experiencias relacionadas con esta industria en la región latinoamericana. Patricio, muchas gracias, bienvenido, y estamos muy atentos a tu intervención.
Bueno, muchas gracias, buen día. Enormemente agradecido por la invitación y espero poder ajustarme a los tiempos, así que cualquier cosa me estás avisando, por favor. Bueno, como bien dice justamente Milena, yo trabajo justamente en investigación periodística vinculada con los impactos socioambientales de lo que es el agronegocio, centrándome en este último tiempo más en la actividad en México, aunque mi país de origen es Argentina, en donde hemos desarrollado junto con un equipo de colegas justamente un trabajo muy intenso sobre el impacto que están teniendo las granjas de crianza de ganado porcino, ¿no? Nosotros ahora estamos muy enfocados en la situación que ocurre en el estado de Yucatán, mayormente en la península, esto es en el sureste de México, para que se den una idea, en donde de repente estos emprendimientos se han ido concentrando en tanto se encuentra justamente en esta zona la última gran reserva de agua potable del país. México en los últimos años ha entrado en un declive en lo que hace a la disponibilidad de recursos hídricos, que se ha ido acentuando sobre todo en la zona norte del país, en la zona limítrofe con los Estados Unidos, en estados como Monterrey, pero lo que ha pasado justamente es que las industrias se han ido redireccionando justamente a esta zona donde aún quedan, los recursos de los cenotes, que son la principal fuente de agua potable para las poblaciones. El estado... Sí.
Disculpa, una sugerencia. ¿Puedes ir un poco más despacio para que los traductores puedan? Sí, gracias.
Ok, sí, perdón, disculpas. Bueno, en esta zona del país, como les decía, hay una concentración aún importante de agua potable. Esto está disponible para la población de manera subterránea. La zona de Yucatán es un territorio donde no existen prácticamente ríos. Por ende, todo el agua que se consume viene de los cenotes, de estas reservas subterráneas, y el suelo es un suelo muy poroso, por ende todo lo que ocurre en la superficie, básicamente repercute justamente en el agua subterránea, ¿no? Esta zona, les decía, al sureste de México, en los últimos 10 años ha evidenciado una migración y la instalación potente de megagranjas de producción de carne porcina, mayormente orientadas a la exportación hacia mercados como el chino, el mercado de Japón, Estados Unidos y Canadá. Para que se den una idea del tamaño de estas granjas, estamos hablando de instalaciones donde muy fácilmente se aglomeran hasta 60.000, 50.000 cerdos, ¿no? En distintas fases de crianza, de engorde o de sacrificio. Solo en el estado de Yucatán, ¿no? Hemos detectado que funcionan más de 220 megagranjas donde se efectúa justamente esta crianza de cerdos, ¿no? Con una situación de depredación de las reservas de agua y al mismo tiempo de avance sobre los territorios selváticos que conforman esta parte de México. Por otra parte, es el territorio donde aún sobrevive básicamente una población maya masiva. Estamos hablando de 1 millón de habitantes justamente del pueblo maya, que son los que sufren los efectos en el ambiente de estas instalaciones. A la par de estas 200 megagranjas que hemos detectado en esta región, hemos notado que alrededor de 40 están instaladas en zonas que son decretadas como áreas naturales protegidas. De hecho, hay algunas que también están en áreas Ramsar, que son las que en definitiva identifican y buscan la protección de los humedales a nivel internacional, ¿no? Bueno, en sí estamos hablando de casi un porcentaje total cercano a la mitad de todas estas granjas que están instaladas en zonas que son de atención prioritaria para la conservación de la biodiversidad. Para que se den una idea del volumen de impacto que generan justamente estas instalaciones de producción intensiva de carne de cerdo, distintos reportes de organismos oficiales de México hablan de que la contaminación por los desechos que generan justamente estas plantas es 6 veces mayor a lo que es originado por la población humana que está asentada en esta región. Y les estoy hablando de un estado donde hoy por hoy se acumulan alrededor de 1 millón y medio de habitantes, ¿no? Bueno, el impacto mayor, como les decía, tiene que ver con el agua, básicamente por esta filtración que ocurre a partir de las características del suelo, justamente en Yucatán, y al mismo tiempo por el tipo de, digamos, de procesamiento que hacen los animales de los alimentos que consumen, ¿no? En el caso de la ganadería porcina, alrededor del 60% justamente de las proteínas que incorporan estos animales luego es liberada, es excretada a través de las heces o de la orina, y esto va directamente al manto freático, es decir, se acumula en las fuentes de aguas disponibles, ¿no? Como les decía, el impacto es inmediato. Estamos hablando de que básicamente estas plantas porcinas están generando contaminación en territorios que hoy por hoy representan prácticamente el 90% de las poblaciones mayas que están distribuidas justamente en esta región. Son los pobladores los que están pagando con su salud, con la imposibilidad, por supuesto, de abastecerse de agua, el impacto que están teniendo justamente estas granjas. Por supuesto que las empresas, sobre todo una que es la principal, que se llama Quequén, que es una empresa de un grupo mexicano llamado Cuo, es una empresa que integra un conglomerado de compañías que están vinculadas con el sector automotriz también, que están vinculadas con el sector de la química, o sea, es realmente un gigante económico mexicano. Bueno, obviamente estas empresas recurren a los discursos que ya conocemos de la presunta creación de empleo, de la generación de valor agregado, de la mejora económica de los territorios. La realidad es que el resultado, después de más de 15 años de este modelo instalándose en Yucatán, es la depredación justamente de las fuentes de agua y una creación mínima de empleo. Para que se den una idea, hace muy poco estuvimos trabajando en un municipio cercano a Mérida, que es la capital de Yucatán. Este municipio se llama Izamal, y en ese territorio existe un pueblito que se llama Sitilpech, en donde Quequén, la empresa del grupo Cuo, instaló una megaplanta justamente de procesamiento de cerdos, que básicamente trabaja con casi 50.000 animales. Para que se den una idea del tamaño, mientras que la planta justamente reúne a 50.000 cerdos, el pueblo de Sitilpech no llega a los 1.200 habitantes. Y todo el municipio de Izamal, donde está instalada esta granja, apenas se alcanza a los 22.000 habitantes. Estamos hablando de que hay más del doble de cerdos en el municipio que de habitantes, ¿no? Entonces, básicamente es un territorio que ha sido elegido para el sacrificio de la industria porcina. Y en esa zona se está dando justamente uno de los grandes impactos que tiene la industria sobre el ambiente. Es una zona donde las poblaciones mayas se ocupan mayormente de la agricultura, y bueno, actualmente sufren la pérdida de los cultivos, porque las instalaciones también de las granjas aplican plaguicidas, por ejemplo, para el control de potenciales agentes que puedan afectar a los cerdos. Esos plaguicidas luego se mueven por el ambiente a través de derivas, a través del aire. Eso contamina justamente las plantaciones de los campesinos. Por supuesto que el impacto en el agua hace que tampoco puedan utilizar ese recurso, y básicamente lo que se genera es una pérdida total tanto de soberanía como de seguridad alimentaria, ¿no? Estamos hablando justamente de quitarles los recursos a los campesinos para su autoabastecimiento, y terminan, por supuesto, comprando en los supermercados que en la región comercializan el descarte de la carne que se produce justamente en las plantas de Quequén. Por ende, la situación es por demás de compleja, y lo que está ocurriendo, afortunadamente, es una combinación de resistencias que se están dando en distintos pueblos, todos de origen maya, en donde básicamente se ha entablado una oposición ya desde lo legal a las granjas que obviamente están esparcidas en Yucatán, ¿no? Están los casos de pueblos como Jomún, como Sitilpech, como Chocholá, como Quinchil, en donde los vecinos, ya dándose cuenta, por supuesto, de que no pueden beber el agua, de que no pueden hacer sus cultivos, de que la aplicación de plaguicidas también afecta a actividades ancestrales como la apicultura, por ejemplo, básicamente no tienen medios de supervivencia. Y como les decía, las plantas, que en muchos casos hablan de la creación de empleo, en el caso de Sitilpech solamente ha generado 7 puestos de trabajo directos. Estamos hablando de casi 50.000 cerdos que son atendidos apenas por 7 personas. Por ende, el modelo también es inviable desde lo laboral. Como les decía, estas poblaciones se han reunido, se han organizado, están trabajando ya de manera legal, y básicamente han entablado una lucha sostenida que ya está dando resultados positivos justamente para las comunidades. En el caso de Jomún, y con esto ya voy concluyendo, este año, en abril de este año, justamente se logró a través de la justicia el cierre de la planta de producción de carne de cerdo, justamente tras comprobarse la contaminación de agua, una planta que también integraba hasta 50.000 animales, ¿no? En Sitilpech ha ocurrido algo similar el mes pasado, la decisión de un juez de mantener el cierre de la granja tras comprobarse que contaminaban las fuentes de agua local, y ahora hay por lo menos media docena de localidades que también están trabajando de manera legal para interrumpir el funcionamiento de justamente estos emprendimientos. La situación es dramática, insisto, por lo que está ocurriendo con el agua, por la depredación de los espacios naturales y por el atentado permanente hacia la soberanía alimentaria de las comunidades originarias. Pero lo valioso en todo caso es que ya hay un trabajo directamente desde lo legal, y afortunadamente están brotando los primeros resultados positivos para las vecinas y los vecinos de este territorio. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti, Patricio. De verdad, muchísimas gracias por mostrarnos estos impactos que causa la industria animal, no solo en pequeñas poblaciones. Esto es una forma de tener una idea de lo que ocurre no solo en México, sino en muchas partes del mundo: Argentina, Brasil, Colombia, en Latinoamérica. También lo que ocurre en Asia son impactos similares en todo el mundo. Entonces, Patricio, mil gracias por tu gran intervención. Realmente apreciamos este espacio. Y también muchas gracias por unirte al espacio de hoy. Ahora quiero dar la bienvenida. Gracias, Patricio. Quiero dar la bienvenida a Karen Reyes. Karen continuará en este primer espacio conversando sobre los impactos de la inversión de la agricultura industrial en el clima, la biodiversidad, el bienestar animal, pero también lo abordará desde un impacto, desde una mirada desde el género y los medios de vida de las personas. Karen hace parte del equipo de Sinergia Animal, es gerente de comunicaciones y difusión corporativa de Bio en Sinergia Animal Colombia. Así que bienvenida, Karen, y gracias por acompañarnos.
Muchas gracias, Milena. Gracias a ustedes por la invitación y a todos los participantes que nos están acompañando. Voy a compartirles entonces mi pantalla. Ustedes me pueden confirmar si ya se puede ver para que pueda iniciar la presentación. Perfecto. Entonces, como lo mencionabas, la idea es contarles en el día de hoy de los impactos de la ganadería intensiva en varios niveles, cómo nos afecta en temas de medio ambiente, también cómo afecta el bienestar animal, y lo vamos a aterrizar también al impacto social, que las anteriores presentaciones han sido excelentes ejemplos de lo que tiene la ganadería intensiva en nuestro planeta en términos de consecuencias. Bueno, quiero empezar contándoles un poco de Sinergia Animal. Nosotros somos una organización internacional de protección animal. En este momento estamos trabajando en 8 países del sur global para reducir el sufrimiento de los animales en granjas y también para promover modelos de alimentación mucho más compasivos. Hemos sido reconocidos por varios años consecutivos como una de las ONGs de protección animal más efectivas del mundo por la Animal Charity Evaluators. Así que, dado que nuestro trabajo está enfocado exclusivamente en los animales de granja, hemos podido identificar cómo es el impacto de este tipo de actividad en nuestro planeta. Y lo primero que tenemos que decir es que desde los últimos 50 años hay una excesiva demanda de productos de origen animal. En este momento, si revisamos el índice de biomasa de mamíferos en el planeta, nos vamos a dar cuenta que el 4% corresponde a vida silvestre, el 36% a seres humanos y un gran 60% corresponde a ganado. Estamos hablando de una cantidad gigante de animales que están siendo explotados anualmente para consumo. Si lo llevamos al plano terrestre, son más de 70.000 millones de animales que anualmente son sacrificados para alimentos. Y si vamos a la vida marina, es tan alto el número que no se puede medir por individuos, sino que tiene que ser medido por toneladas. Estamos hablando de 178 millones de toneladas de acuerdo con la última cifra de la FAO en relación a especies marinas que son atrapadas para consumo. Este gran número de animales ha llevado a una intensificación en la forma en que se producen los alimentos. ¿Y esto qué quiere decir? Que cuando hablamos de ganadería intensiva, la mayor parte de las personas cuando piensa en cómo se producen los alimentos, todavía se imagina a los animales viviendo en unas granjas bastante amplias, que tienen salida al exterior, que viven de la forma más natural posible, pero esto no es así. En este momento, el gran número de animales que tenemos están en estos sistemas intensivos, viven en entornos artificiales completamente apartados de la vida natural y esto trae diferentes efectos. Por un lado, hacinamiento, viven en jaulas y esto también les impide realizar gran parte de los comportamientos naturales de su especie. Aquí vemos algunas fotos de gallinas ponedoras de huevo, de cerdas en jaulas de gestación, donde no van a poder nunca conocer el exterior, donde no van a poder realizar gran parte de los movimientos que necesitan, y esto les lleva a sufrir diferentes tipos de enfermedades, lesiones, y por supuesto les genera un gran estrés a nivel psicológico y emocional, que también ha sido medido de manera científica por expertos de bienestar animal. Al mismo tiempo, estos animales van a estar expuestos durante toda su vida a una serie de procedimientos como mutilaciones sin anestesia, van a ser separados de sus madres en el caso de las vacas lecheras y en general, pues en su corto ciclo de vida van a sufrir una serie de padecimientos y enfermedades físicos que no son atendidos ni reconocidos por la industria. Para el medio ambiente, como se ha mencionado en las anteriores presentaciones, pues tenemos un impacto también enorme. Les pido disculpas que mi perro está ya activo en las mañanas, así que se puede escuchar de fondo. Pero en temas de medio ambiente tenemos las siguientes cifras. Por un lado, la ganadería intensiva es la responsable del 57% de todas las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero en el sector de producción de alimentos. Esto quiere decir que es responsable de un cuarto de todas las producciones de gases de efecto invernadero a nivel mundial. Y esto debería ser significativo, pero todavía el debate sobre cambio climático se está centrando exclusivamente en el sector de energía y de transportes cuando tenemos este gran impacto. Gran parte de este resultado se da por el uso de tierras que necesita la ganadería intensiva para operar. En este momento, el 80% de todas las tierras agrícolas disponibles se está destinando exclusivamente a la cría y la alimentación de los animales. Los grandes cultivos de soya que vemos a nivel mundial están en su mayoría destinados exclusivamente para alimentar animales y solo el 6% está utilizado para consumo humano. Al mismo tiempo, se hace un uso excesivo de recursos fundamentales como el agua dulce. En este momento, la ganadería utiliza entre el 20 y el 33% de todo el consumo mundial de agua dulce. Y este uso excesivo de tierras pues lleva a una ocupación de nuestros bosques nativos y actualmente esta actividad agrícola representa una amenaza para el 86% de todas las especies animales que están en vía de extinción. Estamos hablando de cerca de 24.000 especies que están amenazadas por este tipo de actividad. Si lo llevamos a la parte del océano y a la vida marina, vamos a notar que hay un gran efecto en temas de sobrepesca, de contaminación por redes de pesca que utilizan las industrias y adicionalmente hay unas capturas incidentales que se conocen como bycatch y anualmente 100.000 animales mueren por cuenta de estas capturas incidentales. Estamos hablando de especies como delfines, como tortugas marinas, que no son pescadas, sino que terminan atrapadas en estas redes de pesca y mueren. Esto representa el 40% de las muertes de especies marinas a nivel del océano que no son dadas por la pesca. Y adicionalmente también tenemos un sistema muy poco eficiente para alimentar a los peces que están en acuicultura o en piscifactorías, puesto que tenemos que pescar un gran número de animales para alimentarlos a ellos. Es decir, que los peces que se comen las personas son alimentados con otros peces y esto genera un impacto también mayor. Como se mencionó en la primera presentación, muchos de los manglares están siendo deforestados para estas crías industriales y los manglares son uno de los ecosistemas más importantes para enfrentar el cambio climático, así que es otro de los efectos que también debemos considerar. Ahora si lo llevamos a temas de salud, quiero contarles que las Naciones Unidas han hecho un llamado súper importante en relación a cómo la ganadería intensiva reúne todos los factores necesarios para producir futuras pandemias. En este momento los animales que viven en granjas han sido seleccionados genéticamente y esto quiere decir que hay poca diversidad. Entonces cuando se exponen a enfermedades tienen más posibilidades de contagiarse mutuamente. Por otro lado, están inmunodeprimidos, muchas veces en estas condiciones de estrés tan elevadas, y adicionalmente, como estamos ocupando bosques nativos y territorios que eran de fauna silvestre, pues estos animales están expuestos a entrar en contacto con animales salvajes y convertirse en vectores de nuevas enfermedades. Otro dato también muy significativo en temas de salud es que hay un uso indiscriminado de antibióticos en los animales de granja, que no es solamente terapéutico, sino que también se utiliza para prevenir las enfermedades, justamente por estos índices tan altos de hacinamiento, y también para promover el crecimiento de los animales. Incluso hay países en el mundo donde más del 70, entre el 70 y 80% de los antibióticos que están disponibles se están utilizando exclusivamente en animales de granja. Esto contribuye, por supuesto, a la resistencia antibiótica, que es uno de los graves problemas de salud pública que vamos a tener que enfrentar en los próximos años y que se calcula que a futuro podría cobrar más vidas que las que se llevan enfermedades tan graves como el cáncer. Tenemos estudios que han comprobado que incluso las superbacterias que se generan por esta resistencia antibiótica están presentes en el aire. Se han hecho estudios en granjas de pollos y en granjas de cerdos donde se han encontrado superbacterias en el ambiente y que pueden ser resultado de este gran problema del uso indiscriminado de antibióticos. Por último, también hay unos estudios muy significativos respecto al consumo de productos animales. En términos de la carne, por ejemplo, está relacionada al desarrollo de enfermedades como el cáncer, como la diabetes de tipo 2 y como enfermedades cardiovasculares y del corazón. Todos estos efectos, para resumirlo, llegan a un impacto social que nos demuestra que este es un sistema completamente ineficiente. En este momento, las proteínas de origen animal solamente están garantizando el 37% de las proteínas consumidas por los seres humanos y el 20% de sus calorías. Lo que genera esto que es mayor inequidad porque no estamos distribuyendo los alimentos, no estamos atacando el hambre, no estamos generando una nutrición necesaria para toda la población. Para que ustedes se hagan una idea, si en este momento utilizáramos parte de los cultivos que tenemos para alimentar a los animales en seres humanos, podríamos llegar a alimentar tan solo en Estados Unidos a más de 390 millones de personas. Así que trabajar en sistemas que son mayormente basados en plantas es también una forma de garantizar mayor equidad social y enfrentar el hambre. También en estudios que se han realizado a nivel del sur global hemos encontrado que estos productos tienen tan altos costos que muchas veces no son accesibles para las personas. En Colombia, que es mi país, por ejemplo, la mayor proteína que se consume es el huevo y solamente una cantidad muy reducida de la población va a poder acceder a productos como la carne. Y también este tipo de producción se relaciona con violencia. En nuestro país, por ejemplo en Colombia, ocurre que gran parte de la ganadería opera en la informalidad y muchas de las extensiones de tierra están controladas por grupos armados ilegales. Incluso la carne que tiene sellos de sostenibilidad y que llega a los grandes supermercados de nuestro país se ha comprobado que viene de estos terrenos controlados por grupos armados ilegales que además están empezando a operar en zonas protegidas y en zonas tan vitales para nuestra supervivencia como son los páramos. Así que este es un sistema que es ineficiente, que conecta con diversas formas de violencia sociales y que también nos lleva a una mayor inequidad social. Para el año 2050 vamos a tener un reto inmenso y es el de tener que alimentar a más de 10.000 millones de personas en el mundo y el consenso científico es que para lograr alimentar a todas estas personas no vamos a poder hacerlo si mantenemos el sistema actual alimentario tal y como está. Tenemos que generar una transición mayor hacia sistemas basados en plantas que se ha comprobado que sí pueden generar mayores condiciones de igualdad, que también nos van a ayudar en temas de salud y que son la forma de enfrentar el cambio climático. El estudio más reciente de la Universidad de Bonn en Alemania encontró que para lograr nuestros objetivos de cambio climático y poder enfrentar realmente esta amenaza se necesita reducir por lo menos un 75% de todo el consumo de carne en varios países a nivel mundial. Así que todas estas cifras, toda esta información pues nos lleva justamente a este objetivo en común que tenemos, que es desfinanciar la ganadería intensiva. Así que con esta conclusión, pues finalizo mi presentación. Desde Sinergia Animal hemos llevado a cabo varias acciones. Por un lado, logramos ya interrumpir un préstamo que se estaba haciendo a una de las grandes productoras de carne en Brasil. Era un préstamo de 43 millones de dólares que fue cancelado gracias a unas cartas que se enviaron a nombre de toda la coalición y a nombre de más de 200 organizaciones que se sumaron a este objetivo. Al mismo tiempo tenemos un sitio web de consulta que les voy a compartir en el chat, donde medimos a 69 bancos de 19 países diferentes y encontramos que menos de la mitad de ellos tenían políticas de bienestar animal y estamos entablando ese diálogo con todos los bancos, bancos de desarrollo, bancos interamericanos y también los bancos locales de nuestros países en el sur global para que empiecen a implementar políticas y podamos hacer un efecto mucho más positivo al ampliar nuestro sistema alimentario y buscar un futuro más ético, más equitativo y por supuesto sostenible para todas las personas y para los animales. Muchas
Muchísimas
gracias.
gracias. Muchísimas gracias, Karen, por tu intervención, muy importante para dar también la introducción al espacio que sigue. Ahora, después de observar los impactos que está causando la ganadería industrial en las personas, en los ecosistemas y también en los mismos animales, vamos a dar una apertura a esta segunda parte para conocer cuáles son esas entidades que están detrás de esta industria, cuáles son las entidades de financiamiento público y privado que están apoyando el desarrollo de estas actividades de producción animal intensiva. Entonces, mi compañera Daniela Yamamoto va a moderar este segundo espacio y va a dar la presentación a nuestros siguientes panelistas.
Yumi, sorry, I was taking some time just to stop the translation. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you so much for the panelists of the first part of this webinar. So now I would like to invite Led. Is Led here? I just wanted to confirm. Yes, he's here.
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
Great. Led, just confirm it to me. Are you going to present any slides or is not needed?
I do have slides.
Okay. So I'm gonna make you co-host.
Okay.
So you can share.
I will share that presentation.
Okay. Thank you for that, Milena. So just
Great.
to introduce quickly, Led is the head of the Banking Information Center. So he's going to be talking to us a little bit about policies and practice for factory farming. So Led, thank you for being here once again, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Daniela. Yeah, I'm Lad Cannell. I'm with the Bank Information Center. We are not affiliated with any of the multilateral development banks. We are an independent NGO that works to democratize development. We focus on transparency, accountability, inclusion, and sustainability at the multilateral development banks. And today I'm going to focus in primarily on two of the banks, on International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and IDB Invest, which is the private sector operation of the Inter-American Development Bank. Next slide, please.
Lad, you are muted, sorry.
Sorry about that. So yes, I wanted to focus in on the World Bank Group and what the bank says that it does. And the bank, you know, this is.
So, sorry, Lad, again, you are muted.
I'm not sure why that keeps happening. So, as I was saying, I wanted to focus here on what the World Bank Group says it does in the area of agriculture and food. And the first thing it talks about is improving livelihoods and creating more and better jobs, including for women and youth. And of course, we support jobs, we support women, we support youth. The question is, are these jobs in the existing food system, or are they in any kind of new food system? And the problem is that we're talking about jobs that really fit into the existing food system. A second objective that they have is improving food security, including safe and nutritious food. Again, we support food security. The issue is what kind of food they are supporting. And
Again, you're muted, Lad, sorry.
it says that the host keeps muting me, so hopefully we can continue. So the problem, again, it's the existing food system that they're working within the constraints of. A third objective is making agriculture and food more sustainable and more climate smart. This means more productive and resilient in the face of climate change while reducing greenhouse gas emission. This is certainly an objective that we also support. And in fact, the banks are doing some work in this area. And this is primarily on the public sector side, working with ministries of agriculture. And the final objective that they talk about is boosting agribusiness by building inclusive and efficient food value chains. And again, this is an area where we have, in principle, inclusive and efficient is something that we support. However, we have great concerns and caution about the value chains that they're supporting, because these are the value chains that currently exist and not any different kind of farming that we would like to see. Next slide, please. So this is shows what is IFC's current agribusiness portfolio. It is a $4.1 billion portfolio of active projects. Those are things that are currently dispersing or current investments. And again, this is just the IFC, just the private sector business of the World Bank Group. This is not talking about anything they're doing in the public sector. And it does not include the guarantee portfolio, because there's another private sector arm of the bank called the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency that provides guarantees for private sector projects. So these are spread among 242 projects. It's an average of 17 million. I would point out that this is probably not a good indicator in terms of the average, because there are many large projects and then there are a number of very small projects. So the small projects tend to be the technical advisory projects that are $1 million or $2 million, and then the very large projects, which are in the $100 million range often. And you'll see in this portfolio, 47%, almost half, is in commodities, what they call primary production and commodity processing. So we're talking about products like corn, soy, wheat, cotton, things that have significant agricultural or ecological impacts, and that are often water intensive and sometimes grown in areas that are not appropriate for those. And then of the rest of the portfolio, 28%, almost the majority of the rest of the portfolio is in animal protein. So they are providing significant support. If you take 28%, that's more than $1 billion in animal protein. Where is this happening? IFC's agribusiness is, we can go ahead to the next slide, that's fine. A lot of this is happening in the Latin America, Caribbean region. And as you know, Latin America is also home to the largest proportion of the world's biodiversity. So this is having significant impacts on global biodiversity and ecosystem services. The second largest is in East Asian Pacific. We heard earlier from one of our colleagues talking about the impacts of aquaculture on mangroves, and this is also a significant concern. Let's move ahead to the next slide. So maybe it's a bright spot, but one of the things that I wanted to point out is that one of the reasons that many private companies, large companies, come to IFC is because they have performance standards. And these performance standards are considered to be kind of a certification of good practice, that if you're following the performance standards, that means that you're doing the right thing. And indeed, if the performance standards are rigorously followed, they do mitigate many of the impacts of agriculture, as it's currently practiced. So there are 8 performance standards, and you can see them here. They're listed out. Probably the most important of these performance standards is PS1, Performance Standard 1, on risk management and assessment. Well, it's assessment and management of environmental and social impacts. This is sort of the umbrella performance standard, and it requires that all the borrowers or the clients of IFC assess what the impacts are going to be and come up with an environmental and social management system to manage those impacts. Needless to say, or maybe it is necessary to say that, you know, a lot of times these systems that the clients come up with, that the borrowers come up with, they are the minimum that needs to be done to manage impacts. They are not necessarily managing all the impacts that we would be concerned about, like deforestation, like infringement on protected areas, even though these are supposed to be covered by this and by other performance standards. I'll go through the others rather quickly that are still, yeah. PS2 is on labor. That refers to some degree to workers' rights, although it is not, it does not enforce all of the core labor standards of the ILO. PS3 is on resource efficiency and pollution prevention. This again can be a very powerful performance standard because it requires that pollution pollution be managed and be reduced. PS4 is on community health and safety. This requires that impacts on communities be avoided and mitigated. Actually, I probably should have covered a major framework in which all of these impacts are supposed to be managed, and that is the mitigation hierarchy. That usually comes up most noticeably in PS6, which is on biodiversity and natural resources management. But the mitigation hierarchy requires that impacts first be avoided. So the first step is to avoid any impacts. Then they are supposed to minimize the impacts. Then they're supposed to mitigate whatever impacts remain. And if those impacts still remain after avoidance, minimization, and mitigation, there's supposed to be compensation or offsetting. And the compensation is supposed to be compensation that is negotiated in a fair and equal relationship. This often comes up in the issue of land resettlement, which is PS5, when, for example, infrastructure projects require that people be moved from their homes. They're supposed to receive compensation that has been fairly negotiated. PS6 on biodiversity and natural resources management is to consider those areas, particularly of high biodiversity or critical habitat for species and for ecosystems, and is supposed to preserve those. PS7 on Indigenous peoples obviously is a hugely important performance standard. It requires that Indigenous peoples be informed, be consulted, and have the opportunity to participate in projects that may impact them. And in any project that impacts their land, territories, or resources, they are required, PS7 requires that there be free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous peoples. So this is a hugely important performance standard. And unfortunately, what we often see is that these performance standards are not respected. And finally, there's PS8 on cultural heritage. An important point about cultural heritage is that it is not necessarily man-made. Cultural heritage can be natural cultural heritage because many peoples have cultural heritage that they ascribe to the place that they live in, to a river that runs through their territory, through natural features, which can be mountains, it can be a specific rock, it can be trees. These can be part of a cultural heritage, and that is required to be respected and to be protected. So let's move on now to the next slide. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk at length about the performance standards is that it is not only the IFC that is observing these performance standards. There's a group of banks, commercial banks, and export credit agencies and other development banks that subscribe to a group of principles called the Equator Principles. And there are 137 of these financial institutions in 38 countries that subscribe to the Equator Principles. And the Equator Principles include essentially adherence to the performance standards, which we've just talked about. The principles also require a number of different steps, which are laid out here on the slide that you can see. They require review and categorization of what the impacts are going to be, environmental and social assessment, so that's very much like PS1, applicable standards, which we've talked about, environmental and social management systems, which are, again, this is the client, the borrower, has to have a system for assessing and managing impact. Stakeholder engagement is also a requirement, having a grievance mechanism, which means that if there are impacts that impact on people, that they have the opportunity to raise their grievances directly with the borrower and to have them addressed. Independent review, covenants, independent monitoring and reporting and transparency are all part of the Equator Principles. So there is a lot of protection that is out there for impacted peoples. And the big question is this respected? Let's go ahead to the next slide. Before we go on to whether the question whether they're respected, I wanted to raise one other thing, which is the environmental health and safety guidelines. And there are many of these guidelines that are sector specific. In other words, they provide specific guidance for how projects are supposed to be managed in specific sectors. You can see the list here, and I've highlighted one on mammalian, livestock, and production. What is noticeable about many of these guidelines is that they are now about 15 years old. They date from 2007. There are a few that have been updated, for example, on vegetable oil and production, on perennial crop production, and on annual crop production. But the ones relating to animals have not been updated. And obviously that is something that we would like to see happen to reflect current standards and current practices. Let's go to the next slide. So we've talked about what the ideal is, what the practices are supposed to be. Unfortunately, we know that much of the work that IFC is supporting industrial animal agriculture. This shows beef that has been slaughtered and actually came from Minerva, which is one of IFC's longtime clients. They recently divested and got repaid for their loan, but IFC was a lender to and an investor in Minerva for over a decade. And we learned through an investigation with one of our partners that Minerva was in fact continuing to source its beef from ranches that were committing illegal deforestation and infringing on indigenous peoples' reserves. So a lot of illegal sourcing of these beef. Let's go to the next slide. Looking at what is the reality, another and a current client of IFC and IDB Invest is Pronaca, which is one of the largest corporations in Ecuador, and it is a huge producer of poultry and pigs. You can see here the interior view and an exterior view of one of their factory farms. We have found that this is continuing to have impacts on indigenous peoples who live downstream of their factory farms, and they have not resolved outstanding claims or an outstanding judgment that was found by the Ecuadorian Constitutional Court against CONACA. They still have not undertaken the corrective actions that were required under that Constitutional Court decision. Next slide, please. And this is reflecting the monoculture feed practices that we see in countries like Brazil. This is a picture of soy plantation in Brazil that is among those that are financed by IFC. IFC recently approved a loan of $200 million to Louis Dreyfus Corp, which is one of the huge commodity traders, commodity producers and traders that is a large source of IFC's business. So we can see what kind of impacts that has. And go ahead. On a more hopeful note, one of IDB Invest's proposed loans was to Marfrig, which is again, one of the major beef producers in Brazil. You can see the kinds of impacts that that has here in this photograph. Fortunately, thanks to the efforts of about 275 organizations signing on to protest this proposed loan, that loan was withdrawn from IDB Invest's portfolio. And so we can be thankful for your action, and we hope that you'll continue to support opposition to these kinds of loans. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So, you know, it's a fairly negative picture when we look at all of what has been happening and what kind of things have been financed, both currently and in the past. But we want to have a positive vision, and we do find that there are reasons to be hopeful. That there are things that these banks could be doing, specifically supporting agroecological approaches to agricultural development. The World Bank came out with a study on this back in 2008 and pointing out why it was a good idea. And the agroecological farming can double food production within 10 years while mitigating climate change and alleviating poverty. So this is just some examples that I've actually taken from the World Bank's own website about things that they could be doing and could be doing more of. What we do find is that many of these are their smaller facilities where they're providing technical advice. And this is the kind of thing that we'd like to see increased. And I will leave it there and welcome anybody's questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Lad. I would like to kindly remember the speakers to just be aware of your own time, because we're a little bit behind in the schedule, in the agenda. And for everybody else listening, please stay with us. We have a lot of interesting things coming. We have amazing speakers coming. So please bear with us for a little longer. So now I would like to invite Naira Hofmeister to the floor. I'm sorry that I'm looking to the side. I'm just reading my support document over here. So Naira leads the Repórter Brasil team that investigates the social and environmental impact of the cattle production chain and the relations between Brazilian agribusiness companies and the financial market. So Naira, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Eu vou pedir licença a todos para falar em português. Vou colocar aqui meu tempo para não ultrapassar o limite. Quero agradecer muito esse convite, fiquei muito honrada. É uma grande responsabilidade para mim representar aqui a coalizão Florestas e Finanças, da qual a Repórter Brasil, organização que eu faço parte, e é parte também, né? A Repórter Brasil integra a Coalizão Florestas e Finanças, e vou dar um rápido resumo do que é o trabalho que essa coalizão realiza e de como os dados que essa coalizão disponibiliza podem, enfim, ser aproveitados nas mais diferentes investigações ou relatórios, e acho que podem ser úteis a todos. Primeiro, então, eu quero apresentar a Coalizão Florestas e Finanças, né? É um conjunto de organizações, são 8 organizações que integram essa coalizão de vários lugares do mundo, e que se dedicam, a coalizão se dedica de uma maneira geral, contando com os parceiros em cada parte, cada um dentro da sua atividade principal, né? Se dedica a monitorar esses fluxos financeiros que abastecem as grandes companhias do agronegócio mundial e agora, desde 2022, também as grandes empresas de mineração no mundo. E então fazer um trabalho muito parecido com esse que o Lad acabou de apresentar aqui também, né, de análise e tentativa aí de buscar um melhor aproveitamento desses recursos de maneira mais responsável. A Repórter Brasil, como é uma organização fundada por jornalistas, então se dedica sobretudo a contar histórias, né, a partir desses dados que a coalizão disponibiliza, contar histórias sobre as violações de direitos humanos e violações ambientais e as suas relações, então, com esses fluxos financeiros. A Florestas e Finanças também é uma plataforma pública de consultas onde a gente pode, então, buscar com diferentes filtros, né, os investimentos que colocam em risco os ecossistemas naturais em 300 empresas dos setores de carne bovina, soja, óleo de palma, celulose e papel, e também borracha e madeira. Ou seja, a gente pode fazer aí um conjunto diferente de buscas e encontrar como esses fluxos financeiros estão sendo direcionados para cada um desses setores. Dá para a gente fazer filtros por empresa, então a gente pode buscar uma empresa e ter um cenário dos investimentos distribuídos entre as várias operações. Se uma empresa atua, por exemplo, em mais de um segmento esses investimentos vão estar, essa análise sobre quanto dos recursos vai para cada um desses segmentos vai estar também visível. A gente consegue enxergar, por exemplo, se uma empresa atua no setor de pecuária e de soja, a gente consegue enxergar quanto dos investimentos colocam em risco os ecossistemas porque estão indo direcionados para a soja ou por estarem indo direcionados à pecuária. Enfim, é uma plataforma bastante completa. E eu gostaria, então, de trazer aqui para vocês alguns dados. Daniela, eu posso só compartilhar minha tela 1 minuto aqui? Tem algum problema fazer isso?
Claro, sem problemas. Eu acho que você já está como co-host, então é só compartilhar.
Ótimo. Eu vou pedir licença, então, para vocês. Eu tinha preparado uma apresentação um pouco geral sobre os dados da Florestas e Finanças, mas justamente acho que, como o foco aqui hoje é a gente... Deixa eu colocar aqui. É a gente poder falar um pouco sobre pecuária. Eu decidi trazer alguns dados um pouco gerais, mas focar bastante na pecuária, né? Então, aqui só para a gente poder ter esses dados gerais, né? A Florestas e Finanças separa os dados que coleta em 2 grandes segmentos. O segmento de crédito, que é esse segmento que a gente está vendo aqui, no qual, entre 2016 e setembro de 2022, foram investidos, né, em crédito para essas empresas que colocam em risco aí os ecossistemas naturais, 267 bilhões de dólares, né? A maior parte foi para os setores de papel e celulose aí no mundo, né? Esse cenário muda bastante quando a gente olha apenas para a América Latina. Na América Latina, o setor que mais recebe investimentos é o de pecuária mesmo. E aqui eu queria, então, só comparar para vocês o dado de crédito, de investimento, né? Que é o segundo principal, é o segundo segmento, digamos, que a Forest and Finance olha. Então, nesse segmento os investimentos, então, incluem apenas a compra de papéis, né? Shareholding e bond holding, né? São as ações e os bonds que esses bancos investidores adquirem, né? E aí, nesse segmento, então, foram 39, quase 40 bilhões de dólares entre que compõem a carteira de investimentos neste momento, né? Eu acho que é legal a gente dar uma olhada nesse dado aqui sobre os países, né? Então, dentro do setor de crédito, que inclui as operações de crédito bancário, que a gente conhece bem, são bastante conhecidas, né? Mas também inclui outros instrumentos financeiros, alguns bastante complexos. Isso tudo está explicado na metodologia da Forest Finance, está no site, se vocês quiserem consultar, e depois, se tiverem dúvidas também, vai ser um prazer responder. Entre os credores, né, os principais credores dos setores, desses 6 setores que colocam em risco as florestas no mundo, o país com mais volume de crédito é o Brasil. E os bancos brasileiros aí são os 2 principais bancos financiadores, são 2 bancos brasileiros, inclusive um banco público. E o terceiro banco, acho que chama atenção também, porque é o Rabobank, é um banco da Holanda, é um banco bastante famoso por ter políticas rigorosas de investimento, né, do ponto de vista socioambiental, mas, como esse dado aqui mostra, essas políticas não estão sendo suficientes ainda para afastar o risco, que é um volume grande ainda de investimentos que colocam em risco os ecossistemas naturais. Quando a gente olha para o setor de investimentos, o cenário muda, né? Os Estados Unidos passam a ser o principal fomentador aí dessas companhias que colocam em risco os ecossistemas, e aí chama atenção aqui que, individualmente, os principais financiadores são fundos de pensão, né? Então, acho um dado também interessante de a gente destacar, porque são fundos de pensão, ou seja, são fundos de pensão que tentam garantir o futuro de um certo segmento social nos seus países, né? Um grupo de profissionais, por exemplo, mas que, com seus investimentos, estão colocando em risco outros grupos, né? Por exemplo, aqui no Brasil, a gente tem indígenas, grupos de indígenas, por exemplo, ou de outras populações tradicionais que estão ameaçados, inclusive, de desaparecimento por certas operações que acontecem aí dessas grandes empresas, por exemplo, na Amazônia, né? E eu queria destacar aqui também que, olhando especificamente para os investimentos na América do Sul, acho que esse dado é legal, a gente tem, então, uma participação muito maior dos bancos brasileiros, que no caso dos dados gerais se destacam como no setor de crédito, mas aqui pensando apenas nos investimentos, e aí a gente vê aí o BNDES, que é o Banco de Desenvolvimento, né, do Brasil, que tem uma participação de ações muito grande, né, em empresas de carne aqui no Brasil. Bem, e aí eu separei aqui, só queria dar um overview para vocês também, dos dados mais recentes que a gente tem de financiamento dos frigoríficos. Eu fiz uma rápida, a gente recém baixou dados novos, né? Faz algumas semanas que os dados estão bem atualizados, então só queria dar esse rápido overview aqui para vocês. A gente tem aí um total de 16 bilhões de dólares investidos de financiamento, né, entre crédito e investimento nos 3 principais frigoríficos do Brasil. A JBS é o maior frigorífico do planeta, mas a gente vê que, em termos de volume de recursos, esse volume de recursos reduziu, né? Ela está, muito provavelmente, eu acho, inclusive, que por conta da exposição, né, dos vários riscos a que ela está exposta, esse volume de crédito e de investimento, a gente sabe que está reduzindo, né? E aqui trazer os principais financiadores, né? No caso da Marfrig, a gente tem aqui o Bradesco, o Banco do Brasil, bancos brasileiros, né? Então, financiando essas operações, mas a gente tem também Morgan Stanley, tem bancos de muitas partes aí do mundo, né? Acho que é um dado interessante. Na Minerva, a gente tem aqui também BTG Pactual, HSBC, são bancos também, Unibanco, Itaú Unibanco, Bradesco, 4 bancos brasileiros aí, né, no top de financiadores da Minerva. E, no caso da JBS, além do BTG Pactual, que é um banco brasileiro também comercial, aparece, então, o BNDES com esse investimento em ações, que é muito significativo. Também teve um desinvestimento recente, como no caso do IDB na Minerva, que o Led recém mencionou. Mas, enfim, então, essa era a minha apresentação. Realmente, como vocês viram, é um assunto que tem muitos tópicos para a gente abordar, mas eu queria fazer esse rápido overview e também ficar à disposição, não só para a conversa aqui, né, mas se vocês depois quiserem mais informações, vai ser um prazer também explicar um pouco melhor, é um assunto complexo, e eu quero convidar todos vocês enfim, a dedicarem um pouco de atenção a trabalhar com esses dados, que são dados realmente muito ricos, a gente tem usado muito na Repórter Brasil para matérias, e eles nos revelam muitas informações importantes aí para os jornalistas e certamente para atores aí que trabalham e atuam junto à sociedade, junto a organizações da sociedade civil. Muito obrigada.
Thank you, Naira. We have one question because I think Naira was within her time. I think we can ask this question from Kezia quickly. So Naira, Kezia is asking, when you say that there has been 16 million invested in Marfrig, Minerva, and JBS, what time period and by who?
Então, são muitos os investidores, ali naquela lista, né, a gente conseguiu perceber que são dezenas de bancos e instituições financeiras que têm esses investimentos. Esses financiamentos, o tempo, né, que a gente coleta esses dados na Florestas e Finanças, ele é dividido assim. As operações de crédito, a gente tem um arquivo histórico, né, porque são empréstimos, então, empréstimos, linhas de crédito também, e algumas operações bem complexas de apoio aí ao lançamento, por exemplo, desses papéis, que chama bond issuance e share issuance, é quando o banco não atua comprando esses papéis, ele atua ajudando o frigorífico a se capitalizar no lançamento desses papéis, né? Então, para esses dados de crédito, a gente tem um período maior de abrangência, desde 2013, e esse valor é um valor somado. Mas para posições de ações e bonds, o dado que a gente tem são as posições de investimento agora, nesse momento, né? Ou seja, em setembro de 2022, que foi quando aconteceu a última atualização, porque mesmo que esses investimentos tenham acontecido, digamos, há mais tempo, o retrato que a gente tem é assim, hoje, quanto de dinheiro tem esses investidores investidos nessas companhias, né? Acho que respondi, né, a pergunta.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Naira. If we have any other follow-up questions, I can send to you later, and then we can deal with this at the end of the session. So thank you so much. I will now invite Jennifer Black and Martin. So I will quickly introduce you both. Jennifer will start, and then she will also introduce Martin again. So Jennifer Black is head of campaign for World Animal Protection. She is responsible for the global fairer finance campaign, raising citizens' awareness of the impact of their investments, and also working with financial institutions and governments to support a transition towards a humane and sustainable food system. And following Jennifer, we have Martin Zerfas. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Martin. Martin is the founder of New Market ESG, a farm animal welfare consulting company based in Rockville, United States. And formerly, before that, he was also the program manager for farm animals in the Humane Society International. So welcome both. Thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I hope that you can see my screen and hear me okay. Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. Obviously, I'm Jenny. I'm from World Animal Protection. At World Animal Protection, our mission is to move the world to protect animals. But we know that the food system affects so much more than just animals. And that's why we're really excited to work with so many other great organizations together on the problem of development banks funding industrial livestock within the stock financing factory farming campaign. So one of the things that we've been working on is we've really been trying to define what exactly it is we want the development banks to stop funding and what we would like them to fund more of. And we see that as really important for a couple of reasons. The first one is, unlike fossil fuel campaigns, which have asked the banks to stop financing for coal or oil or gas, we don't necessarily want the banks to stop funding forms of livestock production everywhere. There are some forms of livestock production which are sustainable and can provide people with important sources of nutrition, they can support livelihoods, you know, they can bring positives to the world. So this nuance means that we need to be able to define what kind of livestock production we want to see the banks stop financing, and you know what it's acceptable for them to finance. And when we talk about what's unacceptable or what's acceptable, of course, this cuts across many different issues. So you can think of animal welfare, pesticide use, links to deforestation, wages that are being paid. There's lots of different issues that you can think about. And a second reason why we're kind of focusing on this work is to avoid greenwashing. We know that we can't really rely on concepts or principles, because often the banks and their clients who are, you know, receiving the money will claim to be adhering to these principles, while at the same time civil society and communities would say that they're definitely not adhering to these principles. And one example of this from an animal welfare perspective, which is, you know, my background, is a lot of banks and companies refer to, you know, having policies that respect the 5 freedoms of animal welfare. And this is supposed to ensure that a farmed animal can live a good life, free from pain and discomfort. But despite this principle, billions of farmed animals that are produced for companies that claim to adhere to this principle are still kept confined in cages for most of their lives, or are being mutilated by having their tails cut or having their beaks trimmed. And this isn't just true for animal welfare. Of course, we've seen that across many issues, if we rely on broad principles, we open the door for companies and banks to greenwash their activities and to essentially say that their business as usual is sustainable and respects human rights and is good. So now I'll just pass over to Martin, who is going to talk through a little bit more of the work that we've been doing so far on this.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Martin Zerfus, and yeah, Daniela, you got my name right, I think. So just to follow from Jenny's introduction here, we're working on a model exclusion policy. And just to give you a background on where we are, earlier this year, we created a first draft of the policy, and it covered over 50 different areas. So these would be things like air emissions or water usage, stocking densities. And we came up with these more than 50 items and put them in language that the banks can understand, in the sense that they already have exclusion policies for some items. So we're drafting an exclusion policy that would include all the areas that are important for our different campaigns. So a few months ago, we received comments from about a dozen civil service organizations. Probably most of those are on this call. And we incorporated the feedback into a second draft. And, you know, what's really important now is to get more feedback from community members, farmers, other stakeholders. But we're really looking for is our local experts, but then also international experts, because we are trying to strike a balance between having universal principles and standards that would apply all around the world. But then we also understand that different regions have different traditions of farming, different environmental factors in terms of the weather. So we also need to make sure our draft policy is accounting for that. So one of the reasons we're presenting today is just to try to drum up some interest in participating in this exclusion policy development, but then more importantly, once we've drafted it, to help use it as a tool. So I think probably the next slide now. Yeah, and so after listening to Lad talk about the International Finance Corporation policies and standards, it really made me think how important this exclusion policy is. What we have found is going through the different environmental and social governance areas, animal welfare, all the different things that Jennifer introduced that come into play when you are funding livestock operations. What we found is that the IFC actually addresses quite a lot of them, but they don't enforce them. So it's important for us to highlight those in our policy, because that's a way to engage with the IFC and some of the other banks. Because if they have the policy, they should enforce it. And I think if we create a policy that reflects their own standards, it will be hard for them to say that what we're asking for is unreasonable. But the other area of concern is that there are environmental and social areas that the IFC just doesn't address at all. And so those are areas that we're also focusing on in our model exclusion policy. And of course, you can imagine once we draft a final version and have groups sign on, endorsing it, we will have collectively a lot more organized approach, because we can all sort of refer to the same idea of what we want to happen, which is to say, what are the type of farms that we think are actually sustainable? And the exclusion policy is going to help, create that outreach, because we can address something very specific. And I can't emphasize this strongly enough. What is being funded in the name of sustainability is completely outrageous. So the IFC, I think it was less than 2 years ago, approved what is going to be, or what is already, the tallest pig farm in the world. So this is multi-story concrete buildings where the sows will live their whole lives. They never go outside. And the IFC is saying this is climate smart agriculture. So it's a lot of work ahead of us, but the stakes are very high. And we do have a chance to make some more progress with the IFC and the other banks if we could come up with an agreed upon exclusion policy. And I think next slide, or Jenny, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure, I can do. Just very briefly to close. Yeah, basically, we're really keen to get insights and thoughts from as many people and groups in as many regions as we can, in terms of your thoughts on, what the banks should stop funding, but especially what the banks should be funding, and where are those really good examples of truly sustainable food systems in every way. So if you're interested in this, please do reach out to me. probably I'll actively reach out to a few of you anyway, because yeah, hearing some of the other speakers, your work is so interesting. So with that, I'll leave it there and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Martin. Thank you so much for keeping it short, yet so informative and so interesting for us. And also thank you for keeping it open for people to contact you both and share the thoughts and network after this event is finished. I just wanted to quickly make a clarification that Naira has asked me to do. So before in her presentation, when she was talking about the value of the investments in the meat companies, she was talking about billions. So 16 billions, not millions. So just to clarify this point. That said, we are heading to the part 3 of our webinar, and I'll hand over again to my colleague Milena.
Muchas gracias, Daniela. Muchas gracias, Naira, Jennifer, Martín y Lat, por las excelentes presentaciones. Esto es solo una parte del trabajo que estamos haciendo. Como mencionaba Martín y Jennifer, este diseño de la política de exclusión está abierto a la participación y a las opiniones de todos ustedes, así que sus opiniones e ideas sobre lo que debe ser financiado por los bancos o lo que debe dejar de ser financiado es bienvenido. Allí dejamos el correo de Jennifer también para que por favor hagan llegar sus ideas si quieren hacerlo a través de Jennifer o a través de el correo de la Coalición Global por los Bosques también lo pueden hacer. Ahora, para dar un paso siguiente hacia una última sesión en relación a lo que se está haciendo en la campaña para exigir a los bancos que detengan el financiamiento a la ganadería industrial, vamos a dar paso a esta última ronda en la que vamos a exponer algunas de las acciones que se han hecho, que han tenido resultado, para que ustedes puedan conocer directamente de la mano de nuestros socios, compañeros, organizaciones con quienes trabajamos también, qué es lo que se está haciendo, cómo estamos procediendo y de qué manera ustedes también pueden participar y unirse a estos esfuerzos. Entonces voy a dar la bienvenida a Ashley Schaffer, no sé si pronuncio bien el apellido, pero esta última sesión tiene que ver con cuál es esa relación que tienen los bancos públicos con la ganadería industrial, cómo la campaña está trabajando y resistiendo a estos proyectos. Ashley hace parte de la organización Amigos de la Tierra de Estados Unidos. Ella es licenciada en estudios ambientales y política y es una activista senior de agricultura y financiación climática. Ashley ha trabajado para desfinanciar la ganadería industrial, presionando a los bancos públicos de desarrollo como el Banco Mundial, el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, para que dejen de financiar este tipo de prácticas. Ashley colabora con la campaña Stop Financing Factory Farming y trabaja también de mano con las organizaciones y comunidades del sur global para que los sistemas alimentarios sean diversificados y puedan generarse otros tipos de producciones a pequeña escala. Ashley nos va a hablar hoy de los casos de Marfrig y Luis de Frus, que han sido unos casos que se han abordado a través de la campaña. Así que Ashley, bienvenida, muchas gracias por tu tiempo y tienes la palabra.
Thank you so much, Milena. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here. Quick question. I am not able to share my screen. Is that possible to enable? Thank you.
Sí, lo compartiré.
Thank you. Okay, so you'll share my slides for me. Okay. So if you want to go ahead and start with the first slide, Milena, please. Thank you so much. So yes, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Ashley. I'm here with you all today on behalf of Friends of the Earth U.S. And I'm going to provide a brief overview of the two campaigns that we have coordinated on behalf of the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign to resist problematic development finance loans to factory farm projects in the Global South. But real quickly, I'll just introduce Friends of the Earth U.S. So we're an environmental and social justice organization with more than 4 million members and activists in the United States. And we're part of a global Friends of the Earth International Federation, which is a network of Friends of the Earth organizations in 74 countries, working with grassroots movements. And our food and agriculture program in the US works to rapidly transition our food system away from corporate-controlled industrial agriculture to a food system that is regenerative, healthy, and just. So to get started, our goal is to stop public development finance for animal agribusiness and to shift finance to food systems that use agroecological practices and higher animal welfare standards. I believe folks have already shared this, but just to ground our campaign, I think it's important briefly to touch on our objectives and our strategies. So we employ many different strategies to work towards this overarching goal, including research, narrative building, and policy development, as Martin and Jenny were just discussing. But the focus of this brief presentation is how we use specifically project campaigning to build pressure on the IFC and other multilateral development bank decision makers to reduce and eventually exclude loans for animal agribusiness by building a global movement to oppose these newly proposed industrial livestock projects. So although our goal is to get all multilateral development banks to adopt an exclusion policy for the industrial livestock sector to end factory farm finance, the World Bank's private sector arm, the IFC, is a key target because its policies are followed by all of the leading public development finance institutions. So we monitor new industrial livestock projects at 15 development finance institutions through the early warning system, which is a project of one of our steering committee members, the IAP, and I know we're going to hear about that. So we have campaigned to stop new industrial livestock projects in Ecuador, in Vietnam, and most recently, 2 big projects in Brazil. And so those are the 2 that I'm going to focus on today. So in April of 2021, Milena, if you can move to the slide on Marfrig, please. Thank you. So in April 2021, we found out that the IDB Invest was proposing a $200 million quote unquote green loan to Marfrig Global Foods, the second largest beef company in the world, with a long track record of corrupt practices, failed commitments, land grabbing, and illegal deforestation. The goal of this loan was to support Marfrig's Plano Verde, which claims it would achieve deforestation-free livestock production by 2025 in the Amazon and by 2030 in the Cerrado. However, in reality, this loan would have helped greenwash Marfrig and given it a green seal of approval to leverage private sector financial flows. So in September of last year, of 2021, we launched a campaign to stop it. Next slide, please. So we gathered 285 signatures from civil society organizations across the globe in opposition of the loan. We delivered, oh, sorry, I will speak more slowly. We delivered a briefing to the US government, which is the largest IDB Invest shareholder. And we mobilized over 24 organizations to write a letter of concern directly to their IDB Invest executive director. And some of them also requested a meeting with their executive director. So we were able to delay the loan several times. And in February, after 6 months of nonstop campaigning, we found out that IDB Invest had dropped the loan due to environmental concerns. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, yeah, there you go. So building on our Marfrig victory, we launched another campaign in May of this year to stop a $200 million IFC loan to support the trade giant's commodity feed crop expansion in the Cerrado, a threatened biodiversity hotspot in Brazil. We only had about 6 weeks to actively campaign before the board vote. But we were able to mobilize major global opposition, including, similar to what we did with Marfrig, a civil society letter opposing the loan, which was signed by 235 organizations, a U.S. Treasury briefing. Over 24 organizations sent letters of concern directly to their IFC executive director, and then many civil society organizations were able to secure a meeting with their own executive director to share concerns about the loan. So there were meetings held with U.S. government, or excuse me, the U.S. ED office, German, Nordic, Dutch, and Canadian executive director offices. In the end, unfortunately, we were only able to get 2 governments to abstain, the Nordic Baltics and the Dutch. But on the positive side, we succeeded in delaying the vote twice, which drove a full board discussion of the loan. And then it resulted in the executive directors asking the IFC to present their full agribusiness portfolio to the board. So this created another opportunity for us to do advocacy directly with the IFC on their full agribusiness portfolio. So since this loan was approved, we have pivoted to project monitoring. And so Friends of the Earth, Bank Information Center, and an organization, I'm still on the same slide, and an organization called Rede Social in Brazil. We're coordinating with some local partners to do field research and document the impacts of Louis Dreyfus's industrial feed crop operations in Brazil. And we're going to document impacts on local communities and the environment so we can hold the IFC accountable for the harms that they're driving. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So since both of these loans were financing projects in Brazil, our members did quite a bit of outreach there. So this is just a partial list of civil society organizations who signed on to either our Louis Dreyfus or our Marfrig letters to IDB Invest or the IFC. So to conclude, our rapid, next slide, please. Thank you. So to conclude, our rapid response resistance campaigns always start by consulting civil society organizations on the ground in the country where the proposed loan finance project will take place to make sure our campaign has local support. We typically draft a public sign-on letter laying out our concerns very clearly and explaining why executive directors should oppose this loan or should oppose the loan, and try to get as many local organizations as possible to provide input and be an early reviewer. And then once we have the local support established, we launch a very large outreach push, try to get several hundred organizations to sign on. I will try to speak more slowly, apologies. And meanwhile, we ask our allies to send a letter of concern to their own bank executive director. And if they're willing, we ask them to invite them to a meeting and we help set them up with talking points. We know that getting executive directors to vote no on these loans during the board vote is a key strategy to stop these horrible projects from moving forward, which is why we spend so much time on executive director engagement and advocacy. Although the Global North executive directors are typically the largest and most influential bank shareholders, we are always trying to get more Global South advocacy with the IFC and its shareholders, and same with IDB Invest. So finally, once we send the bank our civil society sign-on letter, we always amplify pressure on the banks through a digital day of action in the lead up to the board vote. And we also use other communication tools like op-eds to challenge the dominant narrative that we need factory farms to feed the world. And we're also building our narrative through these campaigns that public investments in industrial livestock undermine the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, and that these funds should be redirected towards small-scale agroecological systems. So that was just a very brief summary. Next slide, please. That was just a very brief summary of our rapid response resistance strategy to date. But really, the purpose of this presentation and this webinar is that we want to hear from you all. So how would you like to engage in this work? How can we make our campaigns more accessible and culturally and politically relevant to folks in the Global South? What other types of strategies would you like to participate in or see us leading to further our collective goals of ending factory farm finance? So we'd love to hear from you. As Milena said, the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign is really just getting started, and we are currently welcoming new members and partner organizations. So please do reach out. I put our campaign coordinator, Maria Aguilar's email here. You can reach out to her. You can also reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, but we'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias, Ashley. También gracias a Patrick y a Viviana, que ya han expresado también el interés en conocer más de la campaña, conocer más sobre el trabajo que están haciendo los bancos y precisamente el trabajo que hace la campaña. Por favor, siéntanse libres de simplemente enviarnos un email. Vamos a compartir toda la información con ustedes más adelante. Pero para Patrick también, cuando nos pregunta de qué manera se puede involucrar la República del Congo en este tipo de campañas, básicamente está abierta la invitación, Patrick, a que en adelante puedas unirte tanto a las actividades que estamos realizando directamente desde la Coalición Global por los Bosques, trayendo toda la información a las organizaciones en África y en otras partes del mundo, pero también a través del trabajo directo que realizamos como campaña en el desarrollo de tanto la política de exclusión, conocer las opiniones de las personas y pequeños agricultores y también otras personas interesadas en la República del Congo en lo que debe ser esta nueva política de los bancos y de qué manera se deben financiar las actividades en diferentes regiones. Es bienvenido, vamos a hacerte llegar la información y nos pondremos de nuevo en contacto contigo. Muchísimas gracias, y a Viviana también. Si nos das un pequeño espacio, vamos a escuchar la presentación de Gustavo y daremos también paso a tu pregunta. Por ahora quisiera, para usar bien nuestro tiempo, dar la bienvenida a Gustavo Zulo. Él es doctor en Economía del Desarrollo y activista por los derechos socioambientales, con base en Brasil, y actualmente se desempeña como investigador en el Proyecto Internacional de Rendición de Cuentas IAP. Gustavo nos va a hablar sobre el sistema denominado Early Warning Systems y cómo está vinculado al trabajo de la campaña, cómo otras personas y organizaciones pueden utilizar esta herramienta para seguir las inversiones en la agricultura industrial, y nos va a mostrar algunos ejemplos precisamente para Viviana, que hace la pregunta sobre esas alertas de financiamiento en Latinoamérica y Asia, para que ustedes también puedan participar en los estudios de caso. Entonces, Gustavo, bienvenido, muchísimas gracias y tienes la palabra.
Hi, well, I'll share my screen here with you. Can you all see it? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for the generous offer to introduce IEP and our role in the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign. So IEP, the International Accountability Project, is an international human and environmental rights organization that assists communities and civil society organizations all around the world. And through the early warning system, the EWS, which seeks to provide information in advance to the bank's board, IEP broadens access to information, informs partners, and amplifies campaigns for communities to lead the development decisions that affect their lives and environment. In other words, IIP defends the right to development of communities around the world that are affected by projects financed by 15 development banks. So, as you can see, the EWS monitors 3 World Bank Group institutions, 2 institutions from IDB Group, the NDB, DFC, EIB, and other 7 IFIs. So it means that an important part of our activities derives from the early warning system, or in other words, from the monitoring of these banks. The EWS is the first civil society-led database to organize, summarize, and standardize projects from the largest development banks. Organizing and periodically distributing this information since 2016 ensures that communities and the organizations that support them are able to oppose projects that are proposed to their territories before they're approved by the bank's board. So much of this information can be found on this page, where information about our work, partners, technical and other relevant information are concentrated. And I will share here with you the link of the EWS so you can search for it. Yeah. And yeah, in addition, and you can see this these icons where you can find our work, partners, technical and other information you can find those information in the icons inside the rectangle. In addition to the AWS, to become a user and have been approved, you can access the AWS search function through this icon at the top right corner of the page inside the red circle. So, however, if you don't have access to the AWS, through the internet searches, you can find the snapshots, which is basically what we are showing here on the screen, where the summarized and standardized information I mentioned earlier is organized. Basically, a snapshot is the place that holds all the basic and public information about a project that has been published by the bank that funds that same project. In addition, if a partner decides to delve deeper into a specific project, information from other sources can be added to a snapshot. And while in this example feature in the slide I'm showing to you right now, you can see a snapshot of an IFC funded project for OLAM. A company involved with factory farming projects, because so far we have found some projects that have been addressed to OLAM, and which is a company that notably maintains relationships with suppliers known to be involved in serious rights violations. So this is the basic result of the unity result of our work. So this is a slide, so you can see that to emphasize the EWS commitment to the access to information, the EWS identifies and, if necessary, seeks information from private actors, be they co-financiers, financial intermediaries, or companies that operates the work, which is basically highlighted inside the red rectangle. So this is the fundamental unity of our work, the snapshots. From there, we do outreach, surveys, community responses, advocacy, and trends analysis. And now let's move on to IIP's connection with the Step Financing Factory Farming campaign. So the EWS plays a very important role in this campaign. IIP shares the list of projects with the steering committee members in a weekly manner. And from this list, not only are projects selected and the tiers of each selected project are identified, but analysis are also prepared there to support decisions on whether to start a campaign in a given project or not. And another very important role played by IP is doing outreach to partners. If a project, for example, is selected, the steering committee can ask IP to reach out to partners, local partners who individually or in partnership with IP are able to collaborate and identifying and assisting communities affected by the projects that were selected. So rewinding just a little bit, I would like to delve deeper in the process of selecting projects, because this process is part of a broader understanding of what factory farming is for this campaign, which is important to understand the size of the campaign's radar. Selecting factory farming projects is not just about identifying projects that are strictly tied to large animal rearing and slaughtering. As you can see in the list of this slide, there are major concerns about projects that deforest and impact the climate, as well as infrastructure associated with factory farming projects and other ways to subsidize them. As it is the case of soy plantations, which has been highlighted in previous presentations, that feed cattle that will be slaughtered on an industrial scale. Now it would be interesting to check some of the numbers that give a slightly more and thus concrete dimension of what we are looking for. Just let me check here. Yeah. So in this chart, for example, we identify a very important share of two regional banks, IDB and AFDB. Those are not the only multilateral development banks with a great impact on a global scale. IFC has been highlighted very appropriately, but these two regional multilateral banks are among the ones that finance factory farming projects the most since January 2022, when we started tracking factory farming projects in a systematic way. Not by chance, most of the receive the most factory farming projects like Brazil, Zambia, and Ecuador are located in two regions served by these banks, Latin America and Africa. Furthermore, it is important to show concrete examples of projects considered here as auxiliary tiers to what could be strictly understood as factory farming. Although these projects can be understood as auxiliary, they're fundamental for the flow, supply of energy, water, and many other fundamental activities for the viability of factory farming projects. And actually, as you can see in this chart, the number of auxiliary projects is much higher than the number of factory farming projects, which are identified here as factory farming land-based, or animal protein projects, which are in blue. These auxiliary projects are the ones that consume the most funds from development banks, which stresses the importance of keeping an eye on the whole structure of factory farming. Moving towards the end of this presentation, I would like to show you the concrete example that has been highlighted for some of the panelists here, but this is an important example of how successful and important this top financing factory farming campaign is and can be. In February 2022, the campaign stopped this IDB Invest from funding a huge cattle range in the middle of the Brazilian Amazon, which is part of a process initiated in October 2021. And so for the future, the goal of the campaign is, of course, to replicate this success case as much as possible with other projects, including some that have already been identified and that are currently in process. Like those two I'm presenting very briefly, such as Norzone, which is an animal protein project in Mexico, and InnovaFeed, addressed to Malaysia and Indonesia, which is basically a insect farm that feeds animal that is being slaughtered in an industrial scale. And so I would like to present in more detail to anyone who wants this. But well, I'll stop here. I'd like to thank you for all your attention. If you want to get in touch with IP, please email me or my colleague Alex. And if you are interested in becoming an EWS user, please visit the page and place your order. We will return back to you as soon as possible. And again, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a ti, Gustavo. Gracias también por respetar el tiempo de la exposición. Ahora vamos a, bueno, ustedes ya tienen en el chat el link para acceder a la página web del Early Warning System. Pero ya para concluir y debido a la premura del tiempo, quiero dar la invitación a nuestro último panelista, Patrick, de World Animal Protection. Es un investigador experimentado con un historial demostrado de largo trabajo en organizaciones sin ánimo de lucro y un profesional en la investigación con licenciatura en medicina veterinaria y máster en epidemiología veterinaria y salud pública por el Royal Veterinary College de la Universidad de Londres. Patrick es director de investigación en World Animal Protection y ha trabajado tiempo antes en otros proyectos relacionados con la ganadería industrial, como es el caso del International Livestock Research Institute. So Patrick va a presentar el día de hoy cómo de manera efectiva, cómo también se están abordando estas causas de la ganadería industrial y de qué manera se puede continuar trabajando de manera conjunta en la campaña. Patrick, bienvenido, muchísimas gracias por tu tiempo, nos alegra tenerte y por favor el micrófono es todo tuyo.
Thank you so much, Milena, for the introduction, and it's nice to be here. And thank you for the opportunity. I request to be enabled to share my screen because I have a presentation. Thank you.
Hi, Patrick, you should be able to share your screen now.
Yes. Yes, and I understand you're able to see it. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Patrick Mwende. I work for World Animal Protection. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. Jennifer, my colleague, did mention what you do, so I won't belabor that. And what I'm going to talk here today, we have done in close partnership with 50 by 40, who majorly focus towards having a fair, healthy, and compassionate food systems. I'm going to talk about just protein transition in Asia and Africa, following 2 summits that we held in Asia and Africa, which were virtually and hybrid version. And the idea was to deliberate on how to scale up humane and sustainable food systems that are resilient and are safe for people, animals, and the planet. One might ask why protein summits and why Asia and why Africa? You realize these are 2 regions based in Global South, but in a way they differ on how food systems are operating in these 2 regions. Asia is the largest meat producing region, accounting for around 45% of total meat production. And the future has shown that pork and poultry is going to grow exponentially for the next 10 years. While in Africa, we are still food insecure in many aspects. And it happens that poorest of the poor live in this continent. And if you look at the climate change connection, we contribute the smallest share of global greenhouse gas emissions. And the impact, in a way, disproportionately affect us. These two summits were held this year, Asia one being held early in the year, that is in March 2022, and it brought together over 40 civil society organizations in that region, while the Africa one was held this year in October, which was organized by World Animal Protection and our partners in this region. Therefore, the key objective of these two summits was to bring together key stakeholders. I understand some of you are here to discuss about protein systems because of the critical role that we play in global food systems. For the Asian goal was to bring the voice of the global majority to the forefront and highlight what a just protein transition can look like in a region as unique as Asia, because you can see the key role that it plays in food systems, and again, the population that is found in that region. Well, in Africa, we wanted to start a conversation about food production systems. And that conversation is because of the key highlights that I mentioned. We are food insecure, and we are the most hit when disaster strikes, like the current situation where droughts are ravaging different countries in Africa. And with that, we wanted to show how our closed local systems should be given at forefront, because many times government and any funding that comes to Africa does not really factor these inherent production systems, which are played critical role for the long time. And through that, want to reduce and end any support for introduction of industrial livestock systems in Africa. For the Asia joint communique, the title that we gave that is Asia Civil Society for a Just, Humane and Sustainable Protein Transition. And this communique outlines where they need to transition away from factory farming, where we need to have animal protein production and consumption by 2030, and the need to stop any further expansion of factory farms. And that is based on public health risks and climate change implications. And I'm happy because I've been following this conversation, and most of the speakers who spoke before me really delved on these public health risks and climate change, AMR, zoonosis, pandemics, and all that, and the need to end expansion of factory farms. In this communique, we are looking at key issues. Basically, we are asking UNFCCC to develop and support implementation of global just, humane, and sustainable transition in agriculture, which could be through increasing global public climate change spending on transitioning our current food systems, and again, invest on research so that we are able to define the specific benefits of shift, because we understand the current awareness amongst public and the literacy level is not at the level that we want, it's not at the level that we can get the maximum support that we're looking at. So this communique targets world leaders who are attending COP27 and parties at UNFCCC. While for the Africa joint statement, the title is The Need to Transform Food Systems, a joint statement on the nexus between climate change and animal agriculture, 2022. And I bring this because we are still grappling this connection, because we are accusing Global North for being biggest contributors of climate change. But of course, we understand you are contributing, even if it's small amount, to that change. So it's the time we want to bring this conversation so that we are able to be ahead of the curve, not to allow systems to be set up. Then it will be so hard to go back to where they were before. In this statement, it outlines how Africa is vulnerable to climate change effects and how important are the local traditional systems that are built on principles of nutrient circularity and agroecology. We understand the kind of systems that we have here, the mixed crop livestock farming systems in which animals depend on leftovers of crops. And again, crops are, the soil enrichment is majorly from effluents that you get from livestock farming. So that is the kind of concept that we are really pushing on, and just trying to place arguments that these systems have really fed Africa for the longest time. So in summary, I see we will not be able to transform food systems in Africa if we don't take critical steps, such as recognizing the critical role that African traditional food systems play in sustainable climate smart agriculture. And they do all this to provide food and protect our environment through ensuring climate safe future. And again, we have to ask Global North to desist from exporting practices that are climate unfriendly. Many times you have seen how some of the production infrastructure that have been banned in developed nations in Global North being exported to Africa. Because it happens, we are quite liberal and our policy are still weak, and therefore it's a play field for anyone coming to Africa to do whatever they feel like doing. Then again, we're asking climate financiers to redirect the much needed finances to boost the indigenous small-scale farming systems in Africa, because not only do they support livelihood at local level, they provide affordable food to the needy community members. This statement is targeting African member states and world leaders at COP27. As you understand, COP27 is being held in Africa, in Egypt, and also the parties at UNFCCC. Understand most of you have really supported us. And again, this is another call to continue building this network and this conversation. And I appreciate those who have been with us, and we'd like to include those who maybe are not with us to pull together for this conversation. So in case you want to know more about this communique, the summits that we have had and the ones planned for the future, please get in touch through a contact that I've provided there. Thank you so much. I hand it over to you, Milena.
Milena, you're muted.
Disculpen, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Patrick, y muchas gracias a todos los panelistas y a quienes nos acompañaron hasta este momento. Si alguien tiene preguntas, por favor, siéntase libre de simplemente compartirlas en el chat o levantar la mano para compartirlas si quieren hablar. Mientras tanto y mientras también quisieran participar, si lo desean así, simplemente para comentarles que vamos a enviar a todos los que se registraron y a todos los que participaron un correo con las grabaciones, los links de las diferentes organizaciones, iniciativas y también vamos a enviar un resumen de lo que fue este espacio del día de hoy. Entonces, muchísimas gracias a todos y a todas. No sé si tengan algunas preguntas. Por supuesto, Patrick, nos pondremos en contacto contigo, Viviana también. Patricio, gracias por acompañarnos. Muchas gracias a todos quienes estuvieron pendientes hasta el final. Y les vamos a enviar también un correo haciendo seguimiento a estos esfuerzos, cómo unirse a la campaña, cuáles son las actividades que estamos realizando y de qué manera pueden participar y seguir extendiendo la voz para que más organizaciones y personas se puedan unir a estos esfuerzos. Habrán varios espacios también durante la COP27. Esperamos confluir allí con quienes pueden participar. Haremos una réplica mucho más pequeña de este espacio, de este workshop, pero desde ya bienvenidos a todos y a todas a sumarse a nuestra campaña. Muchísimas gracias, que tengan todos un excelente día. Gracias a los intérpretes, Daniela, y a todas las personas que nos estuvieron acompañando y apoyando el día de hoy.